Hello, I'm so glad that you are able to take the time to go a little bit deeper on the private sector and how the private sector scales. I know that you are all firefighting and really busy, but if you really have the time, I think this is totally worth your while. So let's dive into this. So this video is about scaling up in the private sector. And why are we interested in this is because, as I mentioned in the lecture, the private sector is the best at scaling up. We've seen an amazing new set of organizations that have completely different disruptive business models that have actually made a huge difference in the world in the private sector. So there's a lot that we can learn from them. And even though all of us are working in the social sectors, I think many lessons from the work that the private sector does are translatable not only to organizations in the nonprofit, but also to governments. So the efficiency is clearly something that we could see in the RNI case. Efficiency was something that they really brought from the private sector. And then the speed at which they work, that's something that the RNI also did beautifully. We can see how innovation is very difficult to be done, in governments or in multilaterals, but the private sector has this a sort of edge over everybody else, and this innovation could be brought to the social sectors in a really important way. They are able to fail quickly. They say fail quickly, because each failure is really learning, which in a large organization is really difficult to do. And of course, they attract capital, which allows them to have the fuel to go far and to scale. So how do they fund? How do they startups fund? They start really with an idea stage and a founder, 100%. I always tell people who are coming to my course, the most important decision is about your co-founder, because one founder on their own is a very tough thing to start a new company in the social sectors or in the private sector. Then they get money from family and friends as they start sort of splitting their option pools. And then they go to seed round, Series A, where they get more money of, percentages are given to these investors who are external to the company. And eventually they go public, where investment bankers get involved and anybody can buy a share in that company. So that's the way that funding accompanies the different scaling stages of an organization, which is of course not available to social sectors, but it's still interesting to know how that works. So why do startups fail? First of all, it takes a long time to get the right intervention, do a lot of research and development, see how technology can help, see if the product is successful. And so it's a long time in that valley of death that we mentioned in the class. So why do they fail? First of all, startups have to really be managed. You don't only need a techie person with a great idea, just do it. It doesn't work. The second reason is that tools that are available everywhere to manage big companies don't work with technology, and they don't work with startups. Then we talked about the premature scaling. Many start to hire people, managers, fundraisers, way before they have a business model. And we know that startups that pivot once or twice are the ones that are most likely to succeed. And then there's also many startups don't have a structured process to test their business model hypothesis, and therefore it's very difficult to quickly fail. So that is the reason that they fail. They assume they know the customer and they know what the features they have to build, falling in love with the solution. We all have that problem, and they focus on the launching date and confuse traditional job titles with what a startup needs to accomplish. I have loved this book. If you ever want to get into it, by Steve Blank, the Startup Owner's Manual. I used it for building our own company, and it helped me very much in a development context. So we talked in class about the 4 stages of customer discovery, validation, creation, and company building, and that the scaling up challenge is usually this premature scaling before you have found a business model. So we're going to use this video to actually help you go through the different parts of this customer discovery, customer validation. If you see that space of customer discovery and validation is one where there's a lot of iterations, where you're pivoting until you find a business model. And this could take a long time. It is not magic. It takes a lot of determination. You don't give up on your vision, but you will give up many times on how to reach that vision. What is the model that will allow you to be scalable, to have a business model that can scale? Only then do you move to the more traditional organization building, company building on the execution side. So just for you to know, this could take 5, 6, 7, 8 years. In Imago, it took us 6 years to get to this point. So in the customer discovery phase at the beginning, you have to be focused completely on the customer problems rather than on your solution. Does your minimum viable product solve that problem? Do your customers agree? And then you can think about a journey of a customer or a beneficiary or who is the final user, join a day in the life of a customer and understanding how your product is going to change that life. So once you have discovered that intervention, that service, that product that solves a problem for your customer, then you go out and you look for customers that are willing to pay the cost for you plus your margin in order to create this product, and therefore in order to be able to reinvest and to grow. So do you have a sales roadmap? You understand the sales taxes. You could have very different cycles depending on, for agriculture products, for example, depending on the weather, for education, depending on the school year. Do you have a set of orders that are validating that you already have this roadmap? And do your financials make sense? Meaning, are you able to have to grow with the prices that you're able to charge? So then comes the more traditional part where you grow customers from few to many. You already set objectives. This is where the business plan makes sense, not before. You position and launch, and you create more demand. You do the marketing. You decide, are you creating new demand or are you moving in an existing market, and what does that mean? And finally is the company building, where you build your organization and management, you hire people, you move from search to execution, and therefore the skills that you need are quite different than the founder. You need a COO. The founders are casualties many times. And then you structure departments, sales, marketing, business development, but that's way down the line. So a startup is an organization that is searching for a scalable business model. A business model describes how a company makes money. A lean startup, which is what we've been seeing, optimizes the use of scarce resources. By being bootstrapped, by being lean, which is something that nonprofits we are very good at, we're also optimizing the use of scarce resources. So how does premature scaling, we saw in that graph, hurt a startup? It hurts it because it reduces agility. You cannot, if you are prematurely scaling, suddenly you introduce rigidities to the system that, people who are in charge of marketing, for example, or sales, you need to be agile so that people are not invested in different functions of a solution that you don't know if that's what's going to scale. It increases the cost of pivoting. There's a reputational risk from early customers that might be unhappy. I think about organizations we work with who are always focused, let's get more customers, let's invest in marketing. You cannot do that until you have solved all your value chain problems in a way that when you get the customers, it's smooth sailing and you have the quality under control. And it shortens your runway. The runway is the number of months of cash that you have to pay for the expenses that you have, which is usually mostly salaries. This is the number of months before you run out of cash in a market scaling up. So when do you avoid lean startups? When the mistakes must be limited. For example, a mission to the many missions we've been seeing of all these billionaires that are taking vehicles to the space. You cannot do a lean startup for that. The mistakes would be just, the human cost would be huge. And also you don't need a lean startup when the demand uncertainty is low. A COVID vaccine, a cancer drug, you know that the demand is going to be huge. So your runway is less of an issue. Very important while you're doing this to have this hypothesis-driven entrepreneurship mindset. There are steps. It is not the most sexy part of the work, but it's really important so that you can actually save resources as you pivot. You have a vision and then you say, okay, what's the hypothesis for my vision? We will see in the next class, this is our theory of change for social sectors. What's my hypothesis of impact? But for the private sector is, what's my hypothesis about what I'm going to, the gap that I'm going to fill? And then you specify your minimum viable product, the essence, the product without any bells and whistles of what is the minimum that your customer needs for their product or the service to solve these problems and change their lives. And then you prioritize which you test. So you will tend to look for low-cost tests who give you a lot of information. Then you quickly iterate, you test the hypothesis about the business model and you decide, am I going to pivot, just change it a bit? I'm going to persevere in the same, this hypothesis was confirmed, or is it time to perish with this solution, not with my vision, but my solution? So once it's confirmed, the hypothesis, and it would take, as I said, many iterations, then it's time to scale. So with that, we end the private sector session. I really hope that this is going to help you when you think about what are the elements that you can import for your own organization. I'll see you next week.